than 700 new Texas laws went into effect Friday, September 1st. Here are some of the laws that might impact you the most. To help us understand these laws, our guest today is Dr. Kevin Stuart, Assistant Professor of Political Science, Director of the Master in Public Policy and Administration program at the University of St. Thomas, and also is a friend of our TLC, Texas Latino Conservatives, and he's been several times in our program, and we are so honored to have you back, Dr. Stuart. Good morning. Welcome to TLC Live.
Good morning, Andrea. So great to be back. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Well, today I'm solo. Orlando is in a special assignment, so it's going to be just you and I. So he's going to give us more time to talk. He normally
All
take
right.
over the program. So, Dr. Stewart, so September 1st, as every September 1st after the legislature, new laws come in place in Texas. This time, 700, and I believe it's 704 new Texas laws that stay in place. But some of them are more important, not that they're all not important, but some of them impact our life the most. So let's talk about in general how these 700 new laws gonna take place in Texas, and now the most important was, or the one that is gonna affect us.
Yes. Well, as many of your viewers may already know, the Texas legislature is a part-time legislature. It's not a full-time job. They are in session for less than 150 days every other year. So they're not even in session every year, but rather every other year. And this is one of those years. And so they come together for most of the first half of the year to address whatever challenges and policy issues have come up in the intervening 2-year period since they last met. And they've given us over 700, as you mentioned, new laws that touch upon everything from border security to voter identity to child welfare, how that's handled, just a wide range. Now, as you mentioned, some of those touch our everyday lives a bit more directly than others. But as you also say, they're all important to somebody, and so it's worth at least knowing what our elected officials have been up to.
So, Dr. Stewart, let's explain, our viewers that they're not familiar with politics. So every year, the legislature meeting, like as you said, it's a part-time job. 700 of these ones. And what I'm seeing this year, it's many of that I never saw before. Like, for example, like the drag queens, and I'm seeing that SB 12 protect kids from drag shows, and the SB 14 bans child gender modification. These kind of new laws, and you can correct me, but I never saw it before.
Yeah, that's right. So a number of issues, we saw several big developments this time in the session. One of them is, and by way of background, the only thing the legislature is required by law to do during that session is pass a budget. So that is always priority number one. They are constitutionally obligated to pass a budget. So they do that. That comes into play because that means after that, they can take up any number of issues that have come up before the state. This time, we saw a lot of development on the so-called social issues, the family-related issues, both at the level of sort of radical, pushing back against radical politics. We see a continuous sorting in the country between blue states and red states, and blue states are sharpening the divisions between themselves and red states are sharpening their definition as a red state. And you definitely saw our legislature in this session take some steps to sharpen the definition of Texas as a red state, where it concerns not only tax policy, but also criminal justice, the border, family issues, the drag shows in public, sexually explicit materials in libraries. A variety of issues came up, and we can talk through all of those if you want, especially since it's just us two.
Exactly. Yeah, I wanna get deep on those, because also the SB 15, it says Savings Women's Sport Act. All of these things has to do with that, and it's being all over the news. It's being the headlines, and we're being seeing protesting, people protesting on that, and it's being impacting the sports when it comes, especially the female sports. So let's get deep on that, because this is it's like a family values. It's like the something that I never saw that is being touched in the Texas legislature or in any legislature, and something that is impacting us every day as parents and as a family and as a society.
Yes. So 2 years ago, I was called multiple times, I think 5 or 6 times, to testify as an expert witness on issues similar to that one at the legislature. And the big question then, as it was this year, was whether you had to participate in sports, in organized sports, according to your biological sex. Now, the reason that's an issue, to help explain it, I mean, it sounds kind of crazy that it would be an issue. Of course, if you're a boy, you participate in the boy division. If you're a girl, you participate in the girl division. But we have people who identify as transgender. And so they identify more with the opposite sex than with the one they were born with. Now, the trouble this creates in sports is that biological males have advantages. There are some advantages for biological males even pre-puberty, but once puberty kicks in, biological males have profound physical advantages in athletic competition over females on average. And so the reason we have, I mean, all this is common sense, but it has to be spelled out. The reason we have sex separate divisions in athletics is because it's deeply unfair in most instances, particularly after puberty has kicked in, for boys or men to be competing against girls or women. So what these laws clarify is that in schools, all the way up now through colleges, and that's what the legislation this session was about, all the way up through colleges in Texas, you must participate in the division according to your biological sex.
How that put us in front of the rest of the country?
So there are a number of other states making similar moves. I think this is an issue where there is broad public support for acknowledging the reality of human sexuality, that human beings come in male and female, and acknowledging the unfairness, the damage that it causes to women's sports to have biological males participating in women's sports. And again, it's almost always that direction that we see things moving. It's almost always an instance of a biological male seeking to participate in the female or women's division in a particular sport. And so there are quite a number of states that are aligning around and with Texas on this issue. And then, of course, there are states that disagree strongly on it.
To me, it seems like before, I mean, like they were trying to protect everybody, the freedom of everybody to feel whatever they want to feel if they don't feel like a female or they don't feel like a male. And to me, it seems like that they forgot before this law took place, and I think this is very important. That's why this law is very important. They forgot that to protect what is common sense. Protect what, I mean, if I was born as a woman, if you were born as a male, and if you want to participate in any sports as your gender, they forgot to protect that. So they were like more concentrating on other things that is not the majority of the population, than protecting what is common sense, what is our values, what is our nature.
Yeah, so there are two big issues, and you hinted at both of them there, regarding having particularly males participate in the female division of sport. One is the competitive advantage that gives them. And there are these profound, ineradicable, men are on average 6 inches taller, quite a number of pounds heavier, significantly stronger and faster. It's embarrassing to talk about, right? but it's just undeniably the case. The data is very, very well established and well attested here that men have distinct physical advantages when it comes to competition in athletic events with females, so that competition between them is largely going to be unfair. And that's why we have men's and women's divisions. And so this is a real threat to the existence of a women's division to have male competitors. And of course, in instances when males have competed in female division, it's not like we have to guess what will happen. It has happened, and it's turned out that even mediocre male athletes will actually win in the women's division. So we know that that's what will happen. That will be the result. The second real worry, the second real problem here is one of safety. Look, athletic competition, again, you're absolutely right that this is common sense, and it feels strange that you need a professor to sort of lay it out. But in athletic competition, you get hot and sweaty. And so cleaning up involves showering, right? Which involves various stages of undress. And it's dangerous, not to mention, it's not protective of people's modesty and privacy to have men and women showering in the same facility. But that would necessarily be the case if you're going to have males and females competing in the same division, using the same locker room, being treated 100% as identical on the team. So there are these two big problems associated with it. And so the legislature stepped in to address it, relieving principals at schools. University presidents were frustrated because they now bear the burden of this huge public issue. And so the legislature stepped in and took the responsibility for them.
Yeah, I'm glad that that happened, because not only that, I can understand, or well, I'm trying to understand. I'm not really understand. I can understand or try to understand if people feel the other way. If people feel like, okay, I was born as a female, but I feel like a man, or vice versa. I try to understand that. I'm not an expert on that. But another thing, it's if you give the right to sick people that they're not really feeling that way, but to take advantage before this law, to take advantage of that opportunity to get into bathrooms of female or male, just because, oh, I feel that gender, I'm not this gender, and I have the right to feel whatever I feel and to get into the bathrooms, that was another issues for like the last 2 years.
Yes, well, what you're pointing out there is such a policy of allowing both sexes in that kind of close physical contact in situations of vulnerability is ripe for abuse. Even if actual patients suffering with gender dysphoria wouldn't themselves abuse it, it's open to the possibility that someone could abuse the policy and commit assaults. And of course, in for example, prison situations, that's exactly what has happened, and there are documented cases of it.
So now let's move to SB 1403, securing our border. This has been like a big issue. It's been for decades. But not only that, I mean, of course, with COVID and then with the new administration, we've been seeing this problem getting worse and worse and worse. So explain to us what is this new law is gonna impact our border.
Yeah, so this new law does two things. One, it authorizes the creation of an interstate compact to address the border. And two, it provides resources and authority to create border barriers, border wall, the buoys in the river, things like that. Also surveillance and monitoring systems. So we can dig into both those parts a little bit. In the first case, and this is really fascinating part of this law, what has previously been left to the federal government to figure out, states are now taking upon themselves in their own authority, in their own right as states. This is a really interesting development in the relationship between states and the federal government. In this law, the way that works out is it authorizes the creation of a compact, or a group of states that join together by agreement. Of course, it's going to be mostly border states, to tackle parts of the border problem themselves when the federal government is failing to do so, as has been obvious that the federal government is profoundly failing to do so in the recent past. The second thing it does then is allow for the creation of those border barriers with state money, and so it authorizes the state to do both those things.
And then that has to do a lot also to support rural law enforcement, which is the SB
Yes.
22.
Yeah, so in a related bill, there is additional support this year for rural law enforcement. It's designated for counties with fewer than 300,000 people. What we have been seeing, of course, with the huge influx of people at the border and traffic at the border, is that rural law enforcement can just get overwhelmed. They don't have the resources to deal with thousands and thousands, literally millions of people flooding across the border into mostly rural parts of Texas and other states. And so the legislature has given additional resources and help and created a pathway for doing that for these rural counties, so that again we can address the problem. In a way, this is common sense too, right? We need to address the problem as close to the problem as we possibly can. And so that means not waiting for the illegal immigration problem to make its way all the way to Houston, all the way to Austin, all the way to San Antonio, but rather trying to enhance law enforcement's ability to interdict these problems where they're happening at the border. Many of those border counties are fairly rural. So that's part of what's going on here. Yeah.
And talking about that as another, the HB6 is stopping the fentanyl crisis. So that has to do also with the securing our border and also supports rural law enforcement, because the fentanyl crisis is very, very big problem that we're having, and opening the border, it's increasing the problem.
Yes, what people have to understand, what all of us have to understand, because if fentanyl hasn't touched your life yet, it will. And it's important to understand how powerful this drug is. It's extremely effective for pain relief in clinical, hospital, doctor supervised situations of intense pain. And it's great for that. But it's also extremely potent in very small amounts. And so a tiny misstep with this drug results in death, many, many instances of that. And so, what we're seeing at the border, part of the border crisis, is the smuggling in of fentanyl, which is then laced into other drugs that are sold, ostensibly for a greater high. But again, you have to be extremely well trained, highly qualified, and very careful in using fentanyl, or it will cause overdose and death. And we're seeing just massive tragedies across the country with respect to that. A number of instances where the first time someone used drugs, the first time they smoked marijuana, it was laced with fentanyl and they died.
The
So
other
now
crisis that,
fentanyl,
yeah, yeah,
sorry, I
continue.
was just going to say, so now fentanyl, now crimes related to fentanyl are felonies. And that's what this legislation does.
Yeah, so that's important to know. So another crisis that also this legislature is touching is the supporting the mental health care. We have a big crisis. Mental health, I mean, it's been with us forever, but we were not paying attention so close, and I think it happened with the pandemic that we start paying more attention to mental health. So explain to us what this law is gonna do.
Yeah, so 2 years ago now, the American Academy of Pediatrics declared a national adolescent health mental health state of emergency, and the conditions of that state of emergency continue right through to today. You're absolutely right. We're paying attention now to mental health in ways that we have not in the past. And now that we are paying attention, what we're seeing is record high levels of anxiety, depression, loneliness, self harm behavior, deaths of despair, suicide is sky high. And not just adults, but even teenagers are highly at risk for all of these problems. It's ironic in a way because Americans are, by any fair historical reckoning, some of the materially wealthiest people ever to walk the face of the earth. We live, a normal middle class American lives with luxuries and comforts that a medieval king could only dream of. And yet we have mental health, deep and widespread mental health problems. And so it is really good to see the legislature turning some attention and devoting some resources to addressing this. And so they are now putting in place some resources to equip schools. Of course, schools are going to be the front lines for this. And so equipping schools and other community agencies to assist in mental health with, particularly with young people.
And you say something very important that you say, I mean, we're on average, we live a great life in this country because this is the land of opportunities. And I'm telling you from my own experience, I'm from Colombia, South America. I came here when I was 25, like 25 years ago, and I was looking for the land of opportunities. I was looking for opportunities. I came with a lot of dreams, and I raised two teenagers. They're now 18. They're twins, and I just put them in college. And that's something that I never understood, why this society is live on depression and sadness and mental health issues when I see like they have everything. Why they are sad? Why they're depressed if they have everything? Coming from a third world country that when we don't have the luxury of the life that people in this country lives. Now I'm living in this country for a reason. I left my country for a reason, looking for opportunities. I decide to have my kids in this country for a reason, not to have them in my country. And I love my country, but let's be honest. I mean, Latin America, everybody wants to come to this country. Even people in Europe wants to come to this country. This is the land of opportunities. Everything is possible in this country. So that's something that I never understood. Why people in this country are lonely, why they're depressed, why they're sad if they have everything. So that's something that I don't get it.
Sure. Well, a big part of the explanation is that when you in many countries, Colombia perhaps is one of them, they may not be as materially wealthy as we are, but there's another form of wealth, and it's those wealth of healthy relationships. And that's where we're experiencing some poverty in the US, is in the quality of our relationships. Profound percentages of people, of adults, report having very few or even no close friends. So we're starved for friendship. We have problems with divorce and out of wedlock births. So we're starved for those relationships with our mothers and our fathers, particularly our fathers. And there's going to be a reckoning for all that. And we see some of that represented here in this legislation and an attempt by the state to step in a positive way. So, details on the legislation, it creates a grant program to intervene in juvenile mental health prior to the justice system intervening, which I think is a really important step. Before now, we have not intervened on mental health issues and questions related to teens really until they were involved or caught up in the justice system, whether it's child removal from homes by the Family and Protective Services Department, or the juvenile justice system. They went to court, they got arrested or got in trouble and wound up in court. And that's when the mental health services would kick in. This is an attempt to intervene before that and to equip communities to intervene before things get to that point. And that's a really strong positive step. But in the broader context, you're right. We're going to have, this won't be the last such legislation related to mental health and related to those interventions. Because as we've been saying, this problem is profound. It's affecting children, it's affecting adults, it's affecting families. It's really affecting all of us in our communities. And this will be the start, but I think not the finish of the need for Texas to intervene in mental health.
And the cherry on top, social media, that instead of connecting is disconnecting. So we're having that problem not only with our teenagers and the kids these days. Like, you go to a restaurant, you see a family of 5 or 6 or 4, and they're all in the phones. and the little one, the 1, 2 years old, he's already know how to manage the phone and the iPad perfectly. So instead of connecting, it's disconnecting us. And parents are, these days, young parents are like the best babysitter is technology.
Yeah, the data on this is rather startling. You see, so there's a scholar known as Jean Twenge, that's her name, who's really good with the data on these questions. And what you see is teen suicide and mental health and severe mental health problems began to skyrocket, not coincidentally, right about the time that teenagers started to get smartphones, particularly the widespread use of the iPhone. I mean, look, I don't want to. The iPhone isn't particularly the iPhone's fault, but smartphones in general. That's
I
right.
have four in front of me.
But
You cannot see it, but I have
that's
4 iPhones in front of me. I work with that.
Yes, but it's particularly startling when you see the data of teenagers get iPhones and other smartphones, and then suicide starts to skyrocket. And I think you're absolutely right that part of the problem there, a big part of the problem there, is the substitution of social media for real relationships. And I think that's going to be something that all of us, parents, legislators, that's going to take a community wide, everyone in Texas is going to have to, we're going to have to get clear about what these devices, what their role is in our life, when it's a help, when it's a good tool, and when it's harming us.
And people tend always to blame somebody else before to blame ourselves. People tends to blame technology, to blame social media. I don't blame technology. I don't blame social media. I blame parents. I am a mom. I am a strict mom. My kids were like, they always say like, oh, Latina moms they're too much, and I don't care what they say. But I think it's our responsibility. We are the parents. They're not. We're not. They're not telling us what to do. We're telling them what to do because we're supposed to know better. So I think it's a big responsibility in parents these days to control what is going on, because we cannot keep blaming. Technology is here and it's going to stay forever, and it's not going to stay there. It's going to get worse or better. I don't know. I mean, but it's gonna get better. We're getting more tech and more tech, and we need to learn how to manage technology. But we also need to learn how to manage the time with our kids and the quality time without technology. So we need to. It's a hard work, and I don't think the legislature is gonna fix that.
No, that's absolutely right. You're absolutely right that the first and foremost responsibility belongs to those of us who are parents. I'm also a parent. I'm a father. I have 3 boys. And, the difficult thing for me as a scholar is when you start reading the data and reading more and more data, it's more and more confirmed how frightening all of this is. But it's hard actually to talk about it without sounding like a crazy person. Because if I just tell your viewers and listeners, parents, trust me, I've read the data. What you need to do is take away the smartphones from your kids. They will think I am a crazy person, but I promise you that is what the
I
data
know.
tells us all that we should be doing.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's move to bans local COVID mandates. So what is now that we've been seeing cases of COVID, the new variant of COVID? So what is that in the new law, SB 29?
Yes, so COVID has now joined the sort of family of diseases that we're going to have cyclical bouts with, right? Just like there's a flu season, there will now be sort of regular COVID seasons. It will crop up and we'll get a lot of cases, and then it will die down again, and then it will happen all over again, right? So it'll be like the flu. What the state of Texas has now said is no mask mandates, no vaccine mandates, no school closures, no business lockdowns. We've been there, we've done that, we're not going back.
That's great. Amen for that. So let's move to HB3, increasing school safety. Definitely this one is very, very, very important. Not only because of the mass shooting, but in all cases, we need to make sure that our kids are safe. When we send our kids to school, I mean, to me, in my head, that's the most security place that I can send my kids. And unfortunately, it's not always that case.
Yeah, so of course, this bill happens in the shadow of the Uvalde shooting, not the only one, but of course, the most high profile one. And so the legislature here is attempting to enhance security for schools. I think really important here is to note that this is a yet another bill where mental health issues are being addressed because there's money and provision within the bill to add mental health resources for schools.
Yeah, that's very important. And I think us as a society, and that also has to do with the rural supporting rural law enforcement. I think that also has to do with Uvalde. We saw, I mean, many law enforcement in that situation that they were not with the current training and they were not ready.
Yes, yeah, you're absolutely right that here we have another instance where, the most precious thing to any of us who are parents are our children. We would lay down our own lives for them. And we demand of law enforcement and school officials that they be ready to do the same as long as they are in a supervisory role over our children. And that's a lot to ask. And so officers need proper training, proper equipment, all the resources necessary for them to fulfill that duty. Because our children are very vulnerable in those situations, and we are very vulnerable in as parents placing responsibility for our children's health, well-being, and learning. It's an awesome responsibility that we hand over to principals and teachers and the law enforcement officials who help them do that. And it's good and right that the state of Texas is providing additional resources to help them fulfill that responsibility.
And because our kids are very vulnerable, I believe they also create the or wrote the HB 900, removes explicit materials from school libraries. So tell us about that one.
Yes, so there are a number of books around the country that have been creating enormous controversy. We are not talking about this is like not your grandfather's banned book sort of
Yeah,
idea
of
where there were
course.
controversial ideas. In fact, the legislation specifically forbids removing a book because of a controversial idea. What it targets is sexually explicit material. I have seen, unfortunately, I've had to see some of these books, and the content is simply shocking, appalling, and it's just unconscionable that it's in the children's either the children's section of a public library or in a school library at all. It has no business there. And the legislature stepped in to try to get a handle on this because we're not talking about one or two books. We're talking about dozens of books in recent years that have been published, often graphic novels. So we're not only talking about sexually explicit words on the page, we're talking about drawn images of children engaged in sexual activity, of children and adults engaged in sexual activity. I mean, it is extreme. It is disturbing. And that's what's being, there's a lot of legal language in the bill that often these bills are kind of boring to read, right? Because they're technical legal jargon. But the actual material that's covered by this bill is anything but boring. It is shocking.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like we don't have enough with all the TV shows, the new TV shows, and now we have a lot of streaming platforms that our kids have access, and they already seen that on the movies, on the shows, on the cartoons, because the cartoons these days is not even close to the cartoons in our time. Uh, I mean, it's like it's not enough with our kids are exposed with the internet, with the social media, with the TV shows, with the cartoons that now we have to put them on the schools.
Well, you're absolutely right. Look, we parents have to be extremely vigilant these days with what our kids are looking at online, what they see on TV. It seems common sense that there ought to be a place that's safe for kids to have freedom to roam, where their childhood is not going to be threatened by anything they find on the shelf in their school library. That doesn't seem too much to ask. And so, what the state of Texas is requiring in this legislation, which of course is being challenged in the courts, is for vendors to label, so the people selling the books to the schools, to label books that have sexually explicit material so that schools will know and won't buy or shelve or catalog those books. And of course, again, this legislation is being held up in court. We don't yet know how it will turn out. But look, to me as a dad, take my political science professor hat off and put my dad hat on. I want the library to be the kind of place for my kids that it was for me in my childhood. When we got to go to the library, we were free. My mom had her books and she would sit at a table and we were in the children's section and we could roam amongst the shelves. We could pull any book we wanted. We got to explore all that the world had to offer us. And my mom could feel safe that what we were going to find there was healthy and wholesome and would enhance and increase our knowledge and wonder about the world and not do damage to us and not end our childhood on the spot. But you can't actually have that confidence right now. And so, what the Texas legislature here is doing is trying to help restore libraries as a place of freedom for children where sexually explicit materials aren't stalking them from the shelves.
Yeah, that's very, very sad that as a parents, we have a biggest challenge. Not only, I mean, the biggest challenge that we have when we become a parents is like nobody taught us how to be a parent, right? So right there is a big challenge. And now facing all of these things outside of the world, because we can do so much inside of our house, but try to control everything around them. It's almost impossible. I mean, these laws help, but at the same time, it's this much they can do, because we as a parents, the law enforcement, the teachers, means like everybody trying to prevent to damage the kids, but at the same time, many people trying to damage them. And why our kids? I didn't see this never before. I mean, my kids are 18. I don't know how old are your kids, but I didn't see that in elementary when my kids were in elementary school. I started seeing these the last probably 5, 6 years, and even worse the last 3 years.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And it's a question worth asking. Why is it so important to those who are suing to block this law? Why is it so important to them that children have access to sexually explicit material? To my mind, there is no good answer to that question. All the answers will be bad.
Absolutely. So let's move to the one of the two last ones, the HB 1243, felony for illegal voting, that also has to do with the SB 1070, protecting elections from fraud. So explain to us, because we're going to have elections in November, and we're going to have the presidential elections next year. And we know that we're being talking about elections or fraud in elections, not only in the presidential election in 2020, but also here in Harris County with the Harris County judge position. So we've been talking about that a lot lately. Not that before we were not talking about that, or it was not any case, but probably since 2020, it's been like the daily talking in politics.
Yes, so there's been a lot of attention the last few years on shoring up or tightening down a lot of the weak spots within our voting system to make sure that every person who casts a vote is the person who's on the rolls to cast the vote and only does so once. And these two measures both seek to do that. One is, again, another interesting instance of where we see states collaborating with each other, states beginning to work in concert, or maybe not beginning to work, but working more in concert with one another rather than isolated. So the first one of those, SB 1070, what it does is establish a process for working with other states to determine when someone is registered in multiple states so that they are only registered in one state to vote. Previously, this hasn't been done. I mean, I have moved from one state to the other. And of course, when you do that, you often move your voter registration. But since the states weren't communicating, what it often meant is people quite innocently were registered technically to vote in two states at once, in the new state where they just registered and in the old state where they no longer live but used to vote. And so what this legislation does is start to create more interstate cooperation so that someone's only registered to vote in one place. The second bit, so that's kind of on the government side. Then you've got something on the citizen side. The second piece of legislation makes it a second-degree felony to commit voter fraud. So this is enhancing the penalty, trying to create more deterrence, right? So this stiffens the penalties for voter fraud, which will decrease the likelihood that someone would be willing to do it because it's now a felony offense to do so.
So I see the highlights of the laws that we talked today, along with the 700 plus that is being that it took place on September 1st. I've been seeing these very try to be very conservative, to bring values, to highlight the values of the family, to highlight the values that we thought that it was a common sense before, and seems like it's no longer like that.
Yes. So overall, a very conservative session, and a number of things that conservatives can be happy about from this session. Of course, no session is perfect, and there are still some. There has already been a special session after the regular session, and there may yet be. I don't think they're done yet. There probably will be another special session. This one all about education. So we've talked through a lot of things that the legislature has done this year, but they may not be finished yet because the governor can always call the legislature back into special session. Only the governor can do that. And he can give them a specific charge, a specific issue that they are to deal with. And everyone is anticipating that later this month, we will hear a call for potentially an October special session regarding education, where, of course, the forefront issue there will be educational savings accounts, or ESAs, which would give parents more choice and make state money follow children rather than following school buildings.
Okay, well, we'll see what's going to happen. Well, what would be the call to action, Professor, for all of us try to understand all these laws that are taking place?
Well, I think it is to talk with your local state representative or your state senator. They are always more welcoming than we would think, perhaps, for people to call them up and ask them questions about what they did during the session. I always encourage people to get to know their local state representative and state senator.
And my call to action is, please, parents, Google will tell you everything. So understand the laws. So that way you understand what is your rights and what is being done. So we need to also do our homework as a parents and as a society, as a community, even if you're a parent or not. All these laws impact our daily life. So we need to do our homework. We cannot just let them do the laws. We also need to do our homework to understand. And if we are not agreeing on something, as you said, Professor, we need to call our state representative, because we are the one that put them there and they work for us. So that's why it's important to communicate with them. Well, Dr. Stuart, thank you so much from University of St. Thomas. As always, that university has always been amazing with us, helping us and help our viewers to understand everything that is going on around only in politics, education, and health. Everything has to do with politics, but understand what we understand these days with all these new laws and any aspect in our life. Thank you so much, and thank you to Sandra Solis that always helping us to put this together.
My pleasure, Andrea. Glad to be back.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, you guys, for tuning with us today. Texas Latino Conservatives. Please visit us at texaslatinoconservatives.com, and you're going to have the list of our upcoming events. You're going to have a lot of information in English and Spanish. Of course, Texas Latino Conservatives is dedicated to our conservative community, always helping to understand not only the laws, but to understand everything that it has to do with our conservative issues. Also, we help through our Leadership Latino program, help people that want to run for office from A to Z to understand how is the process to run for office, to become a public office, and to run for public office. And you can understand not only how to file for that, but also how to deal with media, how to do with the compliance, the ethics, and everything that has to do when you run for office. Is a very complex process, but here at Texas Latino Conservatives, we are helping you to understand that, and we want leaders like you. We want you to be the voice of your community, and if you have a desire to do that, just contact us, participate in our Leadership Latino class that we just have one at the beginning of August. We're going to have another one at the end of January 2024. So always stay tuned with us, not only with our website, but also with our show, TLC Live, every Wednesday at 11 in the morning. Muchísimas gracias por habernos acompañado y nos vemos el próximo miércoles. Chao, chao.